The 6 great demon deities that once sought to destroy the world have finally been defeated by humanity. Even the last of them, the demon deity of the ruined sea, falls in the end. But victory comes at a devastating cost. By the time the final battle concludes, most of the surface has already been swallowed by the sea of death, pushing humanity to the brink of extinction. As the remnants of towering human structures are slowly consumed by the ocean, Lee Se-hun, badly wounded after the final battle, can't shake the feeling that they have still lost. Not only are the surviving heroes nearly wiped out, but even the Tower of Heroes, the very pillar that sustained Earth, has collapsed. And despite the demon deity's death, the disaster it left behind continues to rage on. Lee is not the only one still alive in the last remaining patch of land untouched by the sea. Alongside him are 3 notorious survivors: Mad Hero Yom Sunga, Explosive Hero Louise Vallant, and Ice Hero Amir Singh. The 3 bicker and complain endlessly, even in the face of death. Meanwhile, Lee, humanity's last blacksmith, coldly reminds them that they would have died long ago if not for the weapons he forged. His words provoke them, but none of them dare to challenge his anger. These 3, infamously known as the 3 traitors, were never loyal to humanity or the monsters of Pandemonium. They acted solely for their own benefit, moving however they pleased, earning the title of opportunists. And yet, despite their selfish nature, they survived until the very end, and ultimately contributed the most in the final battle. This realization fills Lee with regret. If they had chosen to fight alongside humanity sooner, perhaps the outcome would have been different. Snapping out of his thoughts, Lee asks if any of them can still survive. The answer is grim. The trio is severely injured, and they won't survive long. Hearing this, Lee closes his eyes and bitterly remarks that things might have been different if they had agreed to help earlier. Moments later, the 3 finally fall. With what little strength he has left, he notices the sea of death closing in on the last piece of land. Realizing his end is near, he decides to forge one final weapon. Reaching into his chest, Lee activates his innate skill, Blacksmith of Bonds. This ability allows him to create special orbs from those he shares bonds with, their properties changing based on the bond and the target's potential. However, when used on himself, it usually produces something inferior, even worse than common iron ore. But this time, what he extracts is different, a colorless or completely empty. Because it contains nothing, Lee decides to fill it with his overwhelming regret. Without hesitation, he begins hammering. As he works, he wonders if the sound he hears is the roaring, ruined sea or the familiar waves he has heard ever since awakening his mana. One thing is certain. Whenever that sound echoes in his ears, he creates items beyond imagination. He continues forging until the ore takes the shape of a dull blade, completely ordinary, with no special power. But before he can act, the sea of death surges forward, dragging him into the depths. As his consciousness fades, regret floods his mind. If only he had realized sooner. If only he had helped others earlier. If only he had persuaded those 3 to act sooner. Maybe everything would have been different. And then, at the peak of his regret, a system notification appears. The weapon he forged triggers an imagery manifestation. He acquires a new skill, Return to Origin. Moments later, when he opens his eyes again, he hears someone calling out to him. Confused, he realizes he is still alive. As his senses return, he hears Assistant Han addressing him as a cadet, a title he hasn't heard in 31 years. Looking around, Lee finds himself standing at the entrance exam of Babel Academy. At first, he wonders if this is merely a flashback before death. But then he recalls the imagery manifestation from his final moments. This isn't a memory. He has truly returned to the past. While Assistant Han grows impatient and warns him to focus or be disqualified, Lee ignores the pressure. Instead, he grips his hammer tightly, fully understanding what has happened. He has been given a second chance. This time, he won't repeat the same mistakes. With a renewed sense of purpose and determination, Lee resolves to seize this opportunity and protect everything he once lost. Reborn with a second chance, Lee is determined to do things differently. The first thing on his mind is meeting the 3 traitors again. But before that, he focuses on the task in front of him. Standing at his station, Lee begins hammering the blade with calm precision. The sound immediately catches Instructor Kim's attention. Though the strikes seem slow, they carry a perfect rhythm, each hit producing a clean, resonant tone without even the slightest hint of dissonance. Recognizing the level of control behind those strikes, Instructor Kim quickly realizes that Lee's forging skills are top tier. Without even noticing it himself, he becomes completely absorbed, watching Lee work until the very end. Meanwhile, Lee remains dissatisfied with the weapon's quality. From Instructor Kim's perspective, however, the blade is already exceptional, more than enough to pass the exam instantly. But in a shocking turn of events, Lee suddenly shatters the sword he just created. Both Instructor Kim and Assistant Han are stunned. Calmly, Lee states that he still has a long way to go, and as a blacksmith, he refuses to present something he considers trash. His words only infuriate Assistant Han, who sees this as reckless and disrespectful behavior. Ignoring the outrage, Lee simply requests another chance to redo his assignment, further fueling Assistant Han's anger. Surprisingly, Instructor Kim allows it. He orders Assistant Han to bring additional materials, despite the hesitation. When questioned, Instructor Kim firmly states that this decision does not violate any rules. With no choice, Assistant Han rushes to comply. However, there's a problem. Only 40 minutes remain in the exam. Lee was fully aware of the time limit when he destroyed the first blade. To him, submitting something subpar was never an option. Intrigued, Instructor Kim continues observing him closely and tells Lee to give it his best. With the new materials in hand, Lee moves toward the furnace. Knowing his current body can't handle perfect forging for long, he immediately begins pouring mana into ignition stones. This alarms the other students, who fear the stones might explode if ignited improperly. Ignoring their panic, Lee throws the stones into the furnace. In an instant, flames of 3 to 4 different colors erupt. The students assume something has gone terribly wrong and scramble to find a fire extinguisher. Even Assistant Han urges Instructor Kim to put out the flames. But instead of reacting with concern, Instructor Kim looks disappointed. He tells Assistant Han that such a reaction is expected from cadets, but not from him. Then, he instructs him to observe more carefully. What burns before them are not ordinary flames, but 5-colored fire demon flames, a high-temperature technique created by resonating 5 different types of ignition stones. It requires incredibly precise mana control, yet it's an efficient method that can compensate for low mana capacity. The students are left in awe as they realize the stones didn't explode. Instead, the iron ingot begins to change color under the intense heat. Only Instructor Kim fully understands what Lee is doing. By resonating the ignition stones, Lee has drastically increased the furnace's temperature while altering the ingot's properties, significantly reducing the time needed for forging. Even so, with only 30 minutes left, the situation remains tight. Lee begins hammering once again. The blade quickly takes shape, but as time passes, his mana starts to run out. The protective flow around his body weakens, and the strain becomes evident. At that moment, Lee realizes just how urgently he needs to train this body after the exam. But right now, he cannot afford to slow down. Pushing himself to the absolute limit, he continues forging without wasting a single second. Time slips away rapidly. Soon, Lee moves on to sharpening the blade, and just as the exam comes to an end, he completes his weapon, a 5-colored flame blade. With its completion, Lee acquires a new skill, Artisan of Flames. When the weapon is appraised, the result shocks everyone. It's a high-grade, high-mid quality weapon. The entire room falls silent. Even Assistant Han is left speechless as he formally declares Lee has passed the exam. Later, Instructor Kim calls Lee to his office. He asks whether Lee truly believes that sword was worth submitting. Lee calmly replies that it is, for now. But Instructor Kim can see it clearly. Lee is still not satisfied. Getting straight to the point, Instructor Kim advises him to withdraw his application. Despite Babel Academy's overwhelming reputation, its refining department has failed to produce meaningful results in recent years. Lee already knows this. In the future, the department will be abolished due to its declining standards. Instead, Vulcan Academy will rise as the world's leading institution for blacksmiths. But Lee doesn't hesitate to disagree. In his eyes, Instructor Kim is wrong. The greatest blacksmith academy won't be Vulcan. It will be Babel, because this time, it's the place he has chosen to enter. Hearing Lee's bold declaration, Instructor Kim calmly responds that if that's truly the case, then Lee must aim to become the top of his class. Without hesitation, Lee confirms his confidence, stating that no one among the students will surpass him. Intrigued, Instructor Kim asks if Lee understands how the top freshman at Babel Academy is selected. Lee already knows. The top 2 students from each department are chosen to take an additional exam, where one representative is selected from each group. From those final candidates, a single student is crowned the overall top of the class. Babel Academy itself is divided into 3 main faculties: the combat faculty Akar Kuf, the support faculty UR, and the technical faculty Borsippa. Within each faculty are dozens of interconnected departments, branching out like roots. To stand at the top of a faculty means achieving the highest evaluation across all those departments, essentially being recognized as top-tier talent by the entire academy. Realizing that Lee has done his research, Instructor Kim shifts his tone. Speaking not as a professor, but as a senior blacksmith, he offers sincere advice. Even if Lee becomes the top of the faculty, finding true success as a blacksmith at Babel will be difficult. For Lee's future, Vulcan Academy would be the better path. Lee understands the sincerity behind those words. Instructor Kim is putting his junior's future above his own position. Even so, Lee refuses to back down. He firmly states that the place he is entering will soon become the best. Though his words border on arrogance, Instructor Kim finds himself not disliking them. In the end, he accepts Lee's resolve, and the two shake hands. At that moment, Lee receives a system notification. He has established a connection with Instructor Kim, currently at level 1. Using his ability, Lee extracts an affinity from him, a fire-infused iron of high rank and mid-low quality. This unique metal contains flame-like properties, resembling wood in structure and capable of storing fire within itself. After completing his admission, Lee returns home. Sitting on his bed, he examines the extracted affinity. While it isn't bad, its size is disappointingly small. His skill, affinity extraction, allows him to quantify relationships and materialize minerals that didn't previously exist, but with such a low connection level, its usefulness is limited. On top of that, Lee's current stats are far worse than those of other freshmen. Though frustrated, he accepts it as the price of returning to the past. There's no point in rushing. Wanting more right now would only be greed. After all, he still has time. This time, he plans to crush the forces of Pandemonium, the same forces that led the 6 demon deities to destroy humanity as part of a larger scheme. To stop them, Lee knows he cannot afford to be selective or hesitant. More importantly, he cannot risk forgetting the future. To prevent that, he decides his next goal is to obtain a skill or tool related to memory retention. With his first step, entering Babel Academy complete, Lee begins planning his next moves. Just then, the system notifies him that his connection has stabilized at level 1 and grants him a new skill, Affinity Imprint. 1 week later, Lee finds himself running late, searching for the training room where the additional exam is being held. After finally locating it, he enters, only to be immediately reprimanded by Dean Michael, who angrily points out that everyone has been waiting for him. Instructor Kim lets out a deep sigh and responds that there are still 10 minutes left before the exam officially begins. However, Dean Michael insists that this is a matter of attitude, not timing. To smooth things over, Instructor Kim apologizes and assures him that Lee will be more careful moving forward. At that moment, Lee realizes something important. It's not just that the refining department is struggling, they're also at odds with the Academy's higher authorities. Now he fully understands why Instructor Kim recommended transferring to another academy. As he takes in the situation, Lee notices a student beside him glaring intensely in his direction. Attempting to greet him, Lee is immediately ignored as the student turns away without a word. Deciding not to waste his time on such behavior, Lee shifts his focus. Just then, another figure arrives late. The dean of the Borsippa faculty, Ryu Yunha. Lee had heard that Ryu once worked at Babel Academy, but he never imagined she would rise to the position of dean. S-rank hero, Weapon Eater Ryu. a powerful figure with the unique ability to grow stronger by devouring weapons, and in Lee's previous life, a longtime customer who frequently traded with him. However, she too met her end during the war. In her final moments, right in front of Lee, she expressed regret over consuming one of his weapons. The memory still lingers. For a brief moment, Lee zones out, until Instructor Kim calls him back to attention and begins explaining the exam. The test will last 90 minutes. During that time, the two participants must craft a weapon that can be used alongside a sword, the same subject from their previous exam. However, this time, there is a strict condition. The weapon must be created using only alchemical smithing. As for materials, they are free to use any ores available in the room. The final products will be judged by Dean Ryu and Vice Dean Barmett, so the students are warned to produce results they can stand behind. With that, the exam begins. Lee prepares himself. Alchemical smithing requires the user to rely purely on mana, carefully resonating with elemental energy to prevent it from going berserk. As he considers his approach, the other student suddenly mocks him, asking if staring at the materials will somehow increase his mana. Lee turns to face him. The student's arrogance is obvious, but before things escalate, Instructor Kim intervenes, instructing him, Hans Barmett, to refrain from making unnecessary comments. Hans immediately apologizes and resumes his work. Hearing the name, Lee quickly realizes who he is. Hans Barmett, the son of Vice Dean Barmett. That explains why both he and Dean Michael seemed familiar. Noticing Lee's realization, Hans grows even more smug. The difference between them is clear. Lee is a commoner, ranked last among the incoming students in both background and mana capacity. Meanwhile, Hans belongs to the prestigious Barmett family, renowned for their alchemical smithing techniques, and possesses mana comparable to top second-year students. In Hans's mind, the outcome of this exam is already decided. Without hesitation, he selects lazulite and Hainam jade, materials known for their high mana density. Dean Ryu observes his choice, noting that both are water-attributed elemental ores. Vice Dean Michael adds that these materials are highly sensitive to fire, making them difficult to smith. However, thanks to the advanced techniques developed by the Barmett family, such challenges are no longer an issue for Hans. When Instructor Kim realizes that Hans can synthesize any ore within 30 minutes, he is genuinely shocked. This level of skill surpasses even most second-year students, let alone a freshman. At that moment, Instructor Kim understands the situation. The exam itself has been designed to favor Hans. A tight time limit, abundant materials, and a focus on alchemical smithing, all conditions that play directly to Hans's strengths. Meanwhile, Lee finally makes his move. He selects Hydrate and Wahong Stone, fire-attributed counterparts to the mana-dense ores Hans chose. Seeing this, even Vice Dean Michael remarks on Lee's pride. As Hans continues his work, he glances at Lee's materials and internally mocks him. With Lee's low mana capacity, controlling something as volatile as Wahong Stone should be impossible. This only strengthens Hans's confidence in his inevitable victory. But in the very next moment, Lee activates Affinity Engraving. This skill allows him to equip and utilize affinity stones directly on his body. He attaches Waham iron to his right arm and begins processing the ores. Watching this, Vice Dean Michael frowns. It appears Lee is attempting to resonate elemental minerals using the same attribute, a reckless approach. According to conventional knowledge, elemental materials must be handled with pure mana alone. Forcing resonance in this way should cause the elemental energy to spiral out of control. In Michael's eyes, Lee is about to cause a disaster. But what happens next shocks everyone. Instead of losing control, an intense surge of fire erupts under Lee's command, perfectly stabilized. Within moments, he completes the forging process and presents his creation, a weapon named Wajiako. The room falls silent. It's a rare-ranked weapon, albeit of the lowest quality, but still far beyond what anyone expected. Hans is completely shaken. Under normal circumstances, elemental energy would have gone berserk during synthesis. Yet Lee not only controlled it, he succeeded. Refusing to accept this, Hans recklessly attempts to replicate the feat by forcefully imbuing elemental mana into mana stones. The result is immediate. His attempt backfires, triggering an explosion. Under normal circumstances, once the evaluation is complete, one of the two candidates would be recommended as the top student of the department. However, with Hans injuring himself during the exam, the outcome is effectively decided. He loses by default. But Vice Dean Michael refuses to accept it. To everyone's surprise, he proposes canceling the results and holding a retest, citing Hans's injury as the reason. Instructor Kim immediately objects, arguing that the exam has already been completed and cannot be overturned, especially when the incident was caused by Hans's own carelessness. Michael, however, refuses to back down. Instead, he shifts the blame onto Lee. He argues that the fastest resonance speed officially recorded at the academy is 5 minutes, yet Lee, who is just enrolled, achieved resonance instantly upon activating his mana. To him, this is suspicious. In reality, what Lee used was alchemy forging. Unlike traditional forging, which kills the ore to reshape it, alchemy forging focuses on understanding the core essence of the material and drawing out its inherent properties. Rather than forcing the material to submit, it harmonizes with it. This method, though not yet widely accepted, will eventually become the standard after years of experimentation. Lee simply arrived at that answer earlier than everyone else. Even so, he has no intention of explaining this to someone who only throws around accusations. So, when questioned, Lee calmly denies knowing anything about it. That response gives Michael the opening he wants. He immediately accuses Lee of cheating, claiming that a freshman from an unremarkable background could never create a rare-grade weapon on his own. Lee is visibly angered by the accusation, but before he can respond, Dean Ryu steps in. She firmly states that the claim is unfounded. Michael, still smiling, suggests disqualifying Lee for cheating and proceeding with a retest. But Ryu has a completely different approach. Instead of arguing, she walks straight up to inspect the weapon. The moment she picks it up, her reaction shocks everyone. Later that afternoon, while walking through the city, Lee reflects on the weapon he created. While it's a solid result, he admits that the fine-tuning is still lacking. Even so, watching Vice Dean Michael tremble with rage was satisfying. As he thinks back on the name, Barmit, something clicks. He recalls a story told by hero Louise in his previous life. Back when she was at Babel, she had purchased a weapon for a cheap price after running errands for a blacksmith. However, that weapon caused severe mana burns, leaving her with lasting trauma. The name of that blacksmith was Barmit. In that moment, Lee realizes the truth. Hans Barmit is directly connected to the incident that led to Louise's suffering. Originally, Lee's plan in this new life was to quickly find the 3 traitors and guide them onto a better path. But now, at least for Louise, things are different. If he keeps Hans in check, her future may change on its own. The next day, a meeting is held within the Borsippa faculty. Several professors oppose the idea of naming Lee as the top student of the department. Ryu calmly asks if they are outright rejecting the decision. Vice Dean Michael responds that they are merely offering advice, pointing out that she has not been in her position for long. While they acknowledge Lee's talent, they insist that his abilities should be evaluated more carefully. Instructor Kim steps in to defend Lee, arguing that their doubts stem from not witnessing his work firsthand. Even if his craftsmanship lacks refinement, his mana control and compatibility with advanced techniques are undeniable. Despite this, the professors remain unconvinced. At that point, Ryu reveals something shocking. The weapon Lee created was only about 60% complete compared to what he originally intended. And that imperfection is precisely what makes his potential so extraordinary. Still, the room remains divided. Seeing this, Ryu makes a bold declaration. If, after watching Lee demonstrate his abilities as a top candidate, they still refuse to accept her decision, then she will step down from her position as the head of the department. 54 years ago, the heavens bestowed the Tower of Heroes upon humanity, guiding its evolution. In response, the underworld unleashed the swamp of pandemonium, corrupting all life. Humanity gained new possibilities, but at the cost of facing an overwhelming disaster. From that very chaos, Babel was born. Standing before the students, the Emperor of Ascension, Ludwig Schubert, delivers a speech about Babel's greatness, an academy that has produced countless heroes over the years. He urges the new generation to move forward and become heroes themselves. Lee listens quietly. He knows Ludwig well from his previous life. On the surface, he appears noble, but Lee understands that the truth is far more complicated. Soon after, the announcer calls for the demonstration of this year's top incoming cadets, instructing them to step onto the stage. 2 other students join Lee as they walk forward. Watching the scene unfold, Lee recalls how, in his past life, he never understood why top students acted so arrogant just because they excelled at the academy. But now he's about to understand. The announcer reveals the demonstration target, a Model 9 automaton, a combat-type golem produced by the Marionette Factory. It possesses enough power to fight evenly against a C-rank hero. Since it carries no weapons, it specializes in close combat. The first demonstration will be conducted by the top cadet of the combat faculty, Akar Cuff, Jake Myers. Recognizing the name, Lee recalls that Jake is the 3rd son of the prestigious Myers family. Despite coming from a lineage known for swordsmanship, Jake is rumored to be an unconventional martial artist. The match begins. As soon as the signal is given, the golem charges forward, but Jake effortlessly dodges every strike. Creating distance, he suddenly shifts to offense and rushes in. What happens next shocks everyone. Jake unleashes a barrage of overwhelming punches, completely dominating the golem. Even Lee is taken aback. This is the kind of talent that appears only once in a decade, even at Babel. In his previous life, Jake only reached A rank and died young. Seeing this level of power now, Lee can't help but question what went wrong. With one final blow, Jake shatters the automaton into pieces. He stands there, completely unexhausted. The audience, the referee, everyone is stunned. Defeating something on par with a C-rank hero in mere moments is no small feat. Lee realizes that Jake has completely stolen the spotlight, which means the next participant will be under immense pressure. The referee then calls the top cadet from the support faculty. You are? Erika Inoue. Lee immediately recognizes her name. There's no need to underestimate her. As the eldest daughter of the Inoue family, one of Japan's 3 great noble houses, she possesses exceptional talent. Though she never conquered the tower, she eventually rose to become an S-rank hero, wielding a mythic-grade weapon. However, her future is tragic. In time, she becomes corrupted into a fiend and is ultimately taken down by her own family. Because of that, Lee knows there is nothing to gain from getting too close to her. As Erika walks onto the stage, she briefly glances at Lee, catching him off guard. For her demonstration, the Model 9 automaton is now equipped with armor, increasing its defensive capabilities to approximately 1.5 times that of the standard version. The test begins. Erika opens a cage she brought with her, releasing a crow. At her command, the bird takes to the sky. The golem immediately shifts into a defensive stance. Even Lee believes breaking through that defense won't be easy. But in the next instant, the crow transforms, morphing into a set of heavy armor-like mass, and dives toward the target. With a single, precise strike, the golem collapses instantly. Moments later, the crow returns to Erika's side. The crowd erupts in amazement, cheering for her performance. Watching all this, Lee begins to feel the pressure. At this rate, if he simply presents an ordinary piece of equipment, he might be booed off the stage. At last, it's time for the final demonstration. The top cadet of the engineering faculty, or SIPA, Lee is called onto the stage. From the audience, Ludwig Schubert remarks to Ryu that it has been a long time since the refining department produced a top student. He hopes the pressure won't be too overwhelming. Ryu, however, remains confident, assuring him that Lee will be just fine. Back on stage, the referee hypes up the crowd, questioning whether Lee can deliver a performance even more impressive than the previous 2 cadets. Without a word, Lee steps forward and draws his weapon, the 5-colored flame blade. The moment its rare-grade status is announced, the students are visibly surprised. It's rare for a top cadet to wield a weapon of that grade. However, compared to the overwhelming displays from the other faculties, the blade appears relatively plain, leaving the crowd somewhat underwhelmed. Watching the reaction, Vice Dean Michael can't hide his satisfaction. In his mind, this only strengthens his chances of taking control of the department. Ryu, on the other hand, shows no doubt. The referee prepares to begin and announces the use of a Model 10 automaton, a combat unit equivalent to a D-rank hero. But Lee refuses. Instead, he requests a Model 8, fully equipped with armor. The referee is stunned. A Model 8 can withstand attacks even from B-rank heroes, and Lee is asking to face an armored version on top of that. He hesitates, claiming it's impossible to prepare such a unit on short notice. But in the very next moment, Instructor Kim arrives, bringing exactly what Lee requested, a fully armored Model 8. With a faint smile, Kim tells Lee to go all out. At this point, even the referee is unsure whether this is still a demonstration or something far more intense. Nevertheless, he gives the signal to begin. All eyes are now on Lee. He slowly unsheaths his blade. As he channels his mana, 5 distinct colors of flame begin to emerge, swirling around the sword. Jake watches in amazement, recognizing the technique's complexity. Meanwhile, Hans dismisses it as nothing more than flashy theatrics, convinced that someone like Lee lacks the mana to make it effective. But he couldn't be more wrong. The 5 colored flames are inherently unstable, each element conflicting with the others. Without precise control and immense mana, they would erupt violently, injuring the user. However, Lee has already found a solution. By utilizing the fire-infused scabbard, which can store flames, and combining it with his skill Artisan of Flames, he safely channels and compresses the energy within the blade. The Model 8 immediately shifts into full defensive mode. And then, Lee strikes. Activating his unique skill, Wildfire, he releases the compressed energy all at once. The 5 colored flames erupt in a controlled explosion, engulfing the battlefield in a massive surge of power. The entire arena is consumed by dust and debris. For a moment, everything goes silent. Then, as the dust settles, the result is revealed. The audience is left speechless. The sheer destruction leaves everyone in complete disbelief. Calmly, Lee sheaths his sword and glances around, casually asking if he might have gone a bit overboard, especially since a portion of the main hall has been heavily damaged. Later, Lee is summoned to Ryu's office. As soon as she arrives, Lee immediately apologizes for the damage, admitting that he should have held back more. But Ryu isn't there to scold him. Instead, an unexpected sound breaks the silence, her stomach growling. Without hesitation, she gets straight to the point. She offers to buy both the 5-colored flame blade and the fire-infused scabbard for 10 times their market value. Lee is stunned, but not because of the offer. What truly surprises him is the fact that he has already established a connection with Ryu. Lee is genuinely surprised. In his previous life, it took multiple transactions and repeated exchanges of weapons before he was able to establish a connection with Ryu. Yet this time, the bond formed almost instantly. Seeing an opportunity, Lee immediately activates Affinity Extraction. From Ryu, he obtains a special grade affinity, an iron-type material of supreme quality that generates heat by devouring other iron. Successfully extracting the ore, Lee quietly remarks that he's done. Ryu, however, misunderstands his words and assumes he has agreed to sell the weapon. But Lee immediately declines. Before she can press him further, Instructor Kim knocks and enters the room, informing her that Chairman Ludwig wishes to proceed with the presentation ceremony right away. He then asks Lee to come along. As Lee leaves, he briefly tells Ryu they will talk again later. Leaving her alone in the room, her stomach still audibly growling. Together with Instructor Kim, Lee heads toward the heart of Babel Academy, the old main building known as the Marduk Estate. Before entering, Instructor Kim reminds Lee to behave respectfully. Chairman Ludwig has already overlooked the fact that Lee damaged the auditorium during his demonstration, and he is a figure far beyond ordinary professors. Lee calmly reassures him and steps inside. There, he meets the Emperor of Ascension, Chairman Ludwig. In his previous life, Ludwig was one of the heroes who perished alongside the Sea of Ruin during the final battle, a man worthy of being called an apex climber. Ludwig praises Lee's performance and expresses interest in his future. As a reward for his talent and effort, he offers Lee 2 items. Without hesitation, Lee requests rewards that will enhance his magic power and memory. Understanding his intent, Ludwig summons 2 rare items, Heavy Dark Ink, a hero-grade material of supreme quality, and Dream Ivory, a hero-grade tool of mid-level quality. Lee is visibly surprised. Both items are extremely difficult to obtain. While they may be difficult to use at his current level, he already has an idea of how to utilize them, and he accepts the rewards with satisfaction. After leaving the office, the badge-like magical item, seemingly possessing its own will, comments on Ludwig's decision. It notes that giving two such rewards is highly unusual for him, but Lee clearly has the capacity to handle them. It even remarks that Lee feels like an old soul in a young body, a depth that even Ludwig himself cannot fully comprehend. Soon after, it's time for class. Inside the classroom, some students invite Hans to join them for lunch. Instead, he boasts about dining with a senior student named Howard, claiming their families are close and that he'll be receiving guidance about academy life. The other students are impressed and ask to join him. But at that exact moment, Lee enters the classroom and fixes his gaze on Hans. The atmosphere instantly changes. Hans freezes in his seat, clearly intimidated. Watching his reaction, Lee feels a sense of satisfaction. Hans is finally starting to understand his place. As Hans silently seethes, Instructor Kim enters the room. With all students present, he begins the first lesson with a unique self-introduction exercise. A staff member brings in a box filled with unusual ingots. Instructor Kim explains that the material is called projection alloy, a substance dozens of times more sensitive to mana than ordinary ores. By simply infusing it with mana, one can shape it into an armament based on their mental image. However, due to its extreme sensitivity, it's difficult to use as an actual weapon. Instead, it reflects the user's inner traits, revealing aspects of themselves they may not even be aware of. For that reason, items created from projection alloy are called avatars. Rather than traditional introductions, students will present themselves by forging these avatars. The results will even be displayed in the main building for a week. Lee isn't surprised. At Babel, even something as expensive as projection alloy, worth over 10 million won per piece, is used casually for student exercises. As the students begin, most struggle to produce anything meaningful. To Lee, it's clear they lack the most important quality. Finally, it's his turn. Stepping forward, Lee picks up the projection alloy. As the top cadet of his faculty, he decides there's no need to hold back. He pours his mana into the alloy, and in the very next moment, a massive explosion erupts in the classroom. The scene then shifts to the main building, where students passing by are left in shock after seeing Lee's projection alloy. During its creation, an abnormal phenomenon occurred. 19 nearby projection alloys were absorbed into Lee's piece. Instead of dismissing it, the professors judged this as part of Cadet Lee's unique aptitude and chose to display it as is. Even after reading the official announcement, the students remained divided. Some believe Lee is a once-in-a-generation genius, while others insist it was nothing more than luck. However, Erica and Jake see it differently. To them, even that massive amount of projection alloy wasn't enough to fully express Lee's true potential. Later, in the blacksmith training classroom, students are once again stunned, this time by the perfectly rhythmic sound of Lee's hammering. Not even a 0.0 second deviation can be heard in his strikes. Even Assistant Han begins to worry. At this level, what is there left for him to teach Lee? In the end, he decides to step aside and focus on helping the other students instead. When the class ends, Lee gathers the blades he forged and prepares to break them as usual. However, Assistant Han quickly stops him, explaining that the weapons must be submitted after this week's smithing class. Confused, Lee listens as Han explains that Babel evaluates student-crafted weapons by distributing them externally and reviewing their performance. Based on those results, the Academy provides further support. Curious, Assistant Han asks what Lee is dissatisfied with. Lee answers honestly. His biggest issue right now is his lack of stamina. He can't even properly attempt smithing heavier materials. Hearing this, Assistant Han suggests using enhancement buffs during training. It's a method Lee never considered before his regression, so the idea never crossed his mind. But now, with his current physical limitations, it makes perfect sense. With buffs, he should be able to handle heavier forging tasks. Genuinely impressed, Lee thanks him. In return, he offers advice of his own. He points out that Han is using too much mana while forging. If he reduces it to around 70% and focuses his strikes on a single point, his efficiency will improve. Assistant Han is caught off guard. Being advised by a freshman is unexpected, but he decides to give it a try. At Babel, autonomous learning is strongly encouraged. Students are free to attend classes across different departments and can even take dozens of courses in a single semester. However, they must complete their core requirements, and accumulating 3 failing grades results in immediate expulsion. Freedom comes with responsibility. With that in mind, Lee boards a train heading toward the UR faculty, specifically the Department of Shamanism. As he steps off, he finds Erica waiting ahead, accompanied by 2 other students. The 2 act arrogantly, telling Lee not to block their way. Annoyed, Lee firmly tells them to move instead. Ignoring the tension, Erica asks where he's headed. Lee explains that he's considering taking a secondary specialization. Interested, Erica decides to guide him herself, casually dismissing the 2 students and sending them ahead without her. As they walk, she asks what kind of secondary specialization he's looking for. Lee replies that he wants to learn enhancement buffs, specifically ones that improve physical ability without interfering with smithing. In response, Erica suggests a barrier technique. At first, Lee recalls that such techniques are mainly used for defense, but Erica explains that their application depends entirely on the user. To demonstrate, she takes out a letter and wraps it with a barrier spell, then hands it to Lee and asks him to try breaking it. Lee applies force, but the letter doesn't tear. Instead of increasing its strength directly, the barrier preserves the original properties while hardening in response to external force. It's a subtle but highly effective technique, especially useful for tasks like smithing, which require precise control. Erica proudly remarks that mastering such a complex application would normally require guidance from a professor. She even offers to introduce Lee to one, mentioning that the professor of barrier composition is connected to her family. As Lee examines the spell, something feels familiar. He focuses, and with a simple adjustment, he breaks the barrier with ease. Erica is left completely stunned. Calmly, Lee thanks her for the guidance and decides to register for the class. At the UR Faculty of Sorcery, students are left stunned as they see Erica walking alongside Lee. Whispers spread quickly, and rumors begin circulating, just as Lee expected. Letting out a quiet sigh, Lee can't help but wonder why people care so much about others' business. If Erica truly had any special feelings toward him, a connection would have already been established by now. Putting that aside, the 2 arrive at the location where Lee is supposed to take his entrance test. Erica escorts him to the testing ground for barrier construction. To his surprise, the testing ground is actually a forest. Other students can be seen wandering aimlessly, unable to find the correct location. Watching this, Lee wonders if the test is essentially a treasure hunt. Without hesitation, he begins walking forward, with Erica following behind. Then suddenly, he stomps his foot. In that instant, the barrier shatters, revealing the professor standing right in front of him. The professor is clearly shocked. Without further questions, he immediately declares that Lee has passed the test, leaving Lee slightly confused. Rewinding a bit, the professor in charge of barrier construction, Robert Perry, had been informed earlier that Erica was accompanying a student named Lee. Thanks to their presence, the number of applicants for the beginner's course had tripled. However, Robert wasn't particularly pleased. He had also received a request from the Inoue family to include a special test, the Labyrinth of Illusory Souls. This barrier distorts the senses, causing those inside to wander endlessly. It's considered a basic technique, but anyone unfamiliar with sorcery wouldn't even realize they were trapped within it. That's why Robert is so shocked. Lee broke through the barrier effortlessly, without any guidance from Erica, relying purely on instinct. Soon, other students manage to arrive as well, and Robert allows them to pass the initial stage. He then explains that the next phase will determine their class placement. A red-haired student eagerly volunteers to go first, hoping to impress Erica. Robert explains the task. They must dismantle the barrier in front of them using only their mana, without destroying its structure. Their performance will be judged based on speed and precision. The test begins. The barrier takes the form of a spiderweb, with a spider acting as its core. The spider senses mana through the web and continuously flees. As long as it exists, the web regenerates endlessly. The red-haired student struggles, repeatedly failing to dismantle the structure. After multiple attempts, he finally succeeds. Time: 2 minutes and 23 seconds. Robert advises him to focus more on understanding the structure rather than forcing a solution. The student leaves disappointed, unable to make the impression he wanted. One by one, the others take their turns, each facing similar difficulties. Afterward, Robert assigns them to the beginner class. Then, it's Erica's turn. With precise control, she completely dismantles the sorcery formula, collapsing the barrier in just 22 seconds. Robert acknowledges her performance, but notes that using standard dismantling methods could have reduced her time by another 2 seconds. Erica accepts the feedback calmly. Finally, it's Lee's turn. At first, he simply stands there, staring at the barrier. The other students are confused by his lack of action, but Lee sees something different. To him, the barrier resembles heavyweight, or specifically in how it repairs itself and resets if it doesn't reach a certain threshold of disruption. In order to smelt such ore, one must carefully balance multiple stimuli and apply them simultaneously. As Lee continues observing, Robert steps forward, about to call out to him, but Erica stops him. In that moment, Lee decides to test his theory, and instantly, the barrier disappears without a trace. The result leaves everyone stunned. Not only did Lee dismantle the barrier, but he also developed a new concept that could be applied to refining heavyweight ore. After completing the test, Lee quietly leaves the training ground. His recorded time is 70 minutes and 45 seconds, something that appears unimpressive to the other students. But Robert understands the truth. If Lee were to face the same barrier again, he would dismantle it in seconds. Because Lee didn't just break the barrier, he created a formula to unravel it. Watching him leave, Robert can't help but wonder what kind of extraordinary weapons Lee will create once he begins combining sorcery with his smithing skills. In the administrative office, a clerk reviews a flood of applications from professors eager to participate in the upcoming session. However, he quickly notices something unusual. Not a single submission has come from Vice Dean Michael's faction. With rumors circulating that the internal atmosphere has worsened after his son was pushed down to second place, the situation begins to make sense. Just as the clerk prepares to make a selection, he receives a message from an assistant. It states that Department Head Ryu will personally oversee Cadet Lee's intermediate smithing. Moments later, Ryu arrives at the workshop, where Lee is preparing to begin. Lee thanks her for making time despite her busy schedule, but Ryu explains that she came because she genuinely wants to see him craft a new item. With that, Lee decides to give it his all and begins smithing dark heavy stone. The process is far from simple. There are many ways to handle heavy stone, but the most difficult is the dark veil method. This technique requires placing the stone in complete darkness, where it spreads like liquid. Using only mana, the user must separate the impurities. As this happens, the size of the stone decreases while its purity increases. Though it sounds straightforward, it is essentially the restructuring of matter itself. Even for Lee, the process is demanding. He manages to reduce the stone to 1/4 of its original size. Any further reduction would compromise its performance. Next comes the second step, channeling mana through a red flame to extract precise sparks. In this stabilized state, the flames become known as Guardian Wildfire, capable of maintaining a constant temperature from the moment they are formed. Then begins the third step. Lee continuously strikes the refined stone with a hammer coated in Guardian Wildfire. The key is to maintain a steady rhythm without pause, allowing the flame's properties to gradually reduce distortion within the material. Watching him work tirelessly, Ryu begins to wonder just how much effort Lee has been putting in behind the scenes. Outside the building, Erica waits patiently. The sun begins to set, and more than 4 hours pass as Lee continues the process. Finally, after absorbing the flames to their limit, the dark, heavy stone stabilizes. The distortion disappears. With that, Lee melts the processed material and pours it into a prepared mold. Ryu is surprised. Instead of forging, Lee chooses casting, a method that alters the material's properties. She begins to wonder what exactly he is aiming to create. For the final step, Lee applies a barrier-breaking formula to slow the transformation of the material, creating a window to construct a mana circuit within it. Moments later, the process is complete. The dark, heavy stone has taken the form of a bracelet. Although Lee is unable to fully draw out the material's maximum potential, his ability to create something entirely new proves his exceptional talent. As a result, Lee acquires the D-rank skill, Black Spirit. The finished item is the Dark Spider Bracelet, a rare-grade, mid-quality artifact. It can absorb and store the wearer's mana. As soon as Ryu sees the bracelet, her stomach lets out a quiet rumble. She quickly tries to hide it, slightly embarrassed, while Lee notices. Ryu then praises the item's resonance. While not particularly strong yet, she notes that if developed further, it could potentially achieve a set effect. Lee, feeling grateful for her support, apologizes for not being able to offer her a proper piece of equipment. Instead, he hands her the remaining material and suggests she use it. Ryu activates her unique skill, Dragon Soul Furnace, and begins processing it. She casually comments that it tastes similar to crispy tempura crumbs. Watching her reaction, Lee realizes that raising her affinity level may be easier than expected. Even as she continues, Ryu keeps glancing at the Dark Spider Bracelet, clearly interested in it. She then asks Lee about his plans for the 5-colored blade and the fire-infused scabbard. Lee calmly replies that he has no intention of selling them for now. Ryu offers a higher price, but Lee explains his reasoning. He plans to use them for the upcoming subjugation class. Besides, he adds with a smile, hunger often makes things more rewarding. He assures her that if he creates equipment worth offering, she will be the first to know. Hearing this, Ryu is visibly pleased. With the smithing complete, they decide to leave the cleanup to the staff and head out. Lee is relieved, as he has no energy left to handle it himself. However, as he tries to walk, it becomes clear that he has completely exhausted his strength. Seeing this, Ryu decides to take him back to the dormitory herself. Before leaving, she casually asks if he is afraid of heights. Without waiting for an answer, she grabs him and leaps out of the window. Even she seems surprised at how much power she can draw out after processing the material. As they travel, Lee reflects on how much has changed since before his regression. Meanwhile, outside the building, Erica continues to wait, wondering why Lee still hasn't come out. She had planned to give him an invitation to a gathering, but for now, she can only stand there and wait. Lee reads the messages spreading across the academy about Erica waiting in front of the forging department's main building for 3 hours. The rumors leave him confused, but he decides not to dwell on them. If it's truly important, he assumes she will find him herself. Soon after, Professor Ricardo Miles, who teaches the Understanding Tools class, greets the students. Without warning, he slams the door and orders everyone to head to the training center immediately, declaring that whoever arrives last will have to run 20 laps. The students are caught off guard and rush into the hallway. Even Lee is confused, as this was supposed to be a theory class, but he joins the run anyway. Everyone manages to arrive on time, except Lee. As a result, he is assigned 20 laps. Without hesitation, Lee begins running, reflecting on how poor his stamina currently is. Meanwhile, Professor Ricardo explains the reason behind the sudden change in teaching style. Originally, Understanding Tools was a theoretical class focused on weapon structures. However, due to a recent series of incidents involving individuals targeting blacksmiths, particularly those who forged high-grade fire attribute weapons, the curriculum has been revised. These attackers, known as Yomdo Hunters, remain an unresolved threat, even from before Lee's regression. The professor emphasizes an important point. No matter how strong a weapon or defense may be, what ultimately matters is the strength of one's own body. From now on, the class will focus not only on understanding tools, but also on developing the physical ability to survive and protect oneself. As the lecture continues, Lee realizes he needs to be more cautious moving forward, and that improving his stamina must come first. While running, he wears the bracelet he crafted earlier. Thanks to it, all his stats increase by an average of 5 or more points. With this advantage, Lee is confident he can shape his current body into something far more capable before the end of the year. After some time, Professor Ricardo calls Lee forward to assess his swordsmanship and invites him to spar. Lee picks up a sword, aware that his movements may be restricted due to the effects of his equipment. To compensate, he decides to rely on a technique he already knows. He launches an attack, but the professor blocks it with ease. Some students assume Lee is simply exhausted from running and begin to mock him. However, the professor sees something entirely different. He recognizes the precision in Lee's movements, a style that seems to instinctively follow the correct path of the blade. Even so, Lee is still slightly rushed in execution. Deciding to end the match quickly, the professor prepares to counter. But in the next moment, as Lee charges forward, the professor experiences a sudden, vivid illusion. By the time the sensation fades, Lee has already gained the upper hand. The professor is stunned. He can't believe he felt genuine fear from a technical student to that extent. Unable to hold back his curiosity, he asks Lee who taught him such swordsmanship. Even Lee is surprised by the outcome. He recalls a memory from before his regression, when, as a blacksmith, he once broke a sword after a customer failed to pay. In return, the man offered to teach him a skill instead of paying, claiming it would be more valuable than money. That was how Lee learned this technique. However, he cannot reveal the truth, so he simply says he learned it by watching battles of heroes online. Impressed, Professor Ricardo believes he has discovered an extraordinary talent and writes Lee a recommendation letter for a body control lecture led by Professor Ma Guangsu. Later that day, Lee arrives to meet the professor. To his surprise, the instructor turns out to be the very same person who taught him that skill in his previous life. Ma Guangsu is a retired S-rank hero, also known as the sword-breaking master. Curious, Professor Ma asks Lee why he's here. Lee hands over the recommendation letter from Professor Ricardo. Jake adds that Lee is one of the top students from the Borsipa department this year. After reading the letter, Professor Ma decides to test them both. He sets a condition. He will only teach Jake if Jake can defeat Lee. The two take their stances. Lee holds a wooden sword, while Jake chooses to fight barehanded. The rule is simple. The first to land a valid hit wins. At the signal, Jake immediately charges forward. Lee responds by taking the Taoryok stance, a technique that maximizes flexibility by completely relaxing the body. Professor Ma instantly recognizes it and realizes the ideal counter would be grappling rather than striking. Jake makes the same decision and moves in to engage. As Jake closes the distance, Lee suddenly releases his sword and charges in as well. Jake overwhelms him with raw strength, but just before Lee hits the ground, he activates a technique, using explosive force to deliver a precise punch to Jake's face. A split second before impact, Lee lands the hit. That single moment decides the match. Lee wins,